Few points of clarification. We're talking about restricting a ban on legal ownership. We're not talking about illegal weapons.
Okay, Lindsay's playing a little fast and loose with her language here. When she says that anything that's illegal, we're still going to enforce that law. What she doesn't mention is that her bill, which is now law in Kentucky, indicates that we're not going to enforce a federal ban on weapons. It defines that federal ban based on date. Federal ban means a federal law, executive order, rule, or regulation. Federal law. So things we have to follow. If they don't follow that law, they are illegal. Any of those that's enacted, adopted, or becomes effective on or after January 1st, or a new or more restrictive interpretation of a law that existed on January 21st, 2021, wonder where that date came from, that infringes upon, calls into question, prohibits, restricts, or requires individual licensure for or registration of the purchase, ownership, possession, transfer, or use of any firearm, ammunition, or firearm accessory. So, based on the date, if Congress, our elected officials throughout the entire country, decides that some sort of weapon or accessory or ammunition, whatever, related to firearms is illegal, this law says that we can't enforce it. So when Lindsay says that we're not going to go after that we are going to go after illegal weapons, she's picked an arbitrary date to go by, which just happens to coincide with the election of President Joe Biden, who she's already established she hates. So yeah, we are going to keep people from enforcing bans on illegal weapons if there's something that passed after that time frame. So Lindsay's lying.
And I can guarantee that everyone in here doesn't want illegal weapons on the street.
Pretty sure Lindsay doesn't care much about illegal weapons on the street. She doesn't want any laws addressing how they get there, or any laws really. So I don't think she's as concerned about illegal guns on the street as other people might be.
Another point of clarification, this federal ban becomes effective January 1, 2021. Any previous federal laws regarding firearms will be upheld in the state of Kentucky.
So what Lindsay's saying is this is a law about Joe Biden. This isn't a law about concerns about federal overreach, because, hey, anything that happened prior to this point is fine. Just anything that may happen after this point is not fine. So that means any Republican who steps in, any federal law passed, no matter who passes it, Kentucky's not going to abide by it. Smart.
Right now we have a president in the Oval Office who is executive order happy. And he just recently issued another executive order to enforce more strict gun laws.
Lindsey Tichenor's choice of words here is interesting, because Biden did nothing to create a new law. It is within his power to enforce laws. And I wonder what in this executive order she finds so troubling. This is an executive order issued on 3/14. Her speech was given 3/15. Here's some of the bullet points. He wants to keep guns out of dangerous hands by increasing the number of background checks, ensuring that all background checks required by law, emphasis me here, are conducted. Again, required by law. So is that more strict enforcement of gun laws? Yeah, probably, but so what? What does Lindsay have a problem with? These are the laws that existed before he took office, so why is she upset about this? Improve public awareness and increase appropriate use of extreme risk protection orders and safe storage of firearms. Again, this is not talking about laws federal level. This is talking about, let's just get some awareness to red flag laws and how to safely store firearms. Don't know why Lindsay would be upset about that. Address loss and theft of firearms during shipping. Okay, this says a 250% increase in number of firearms reported as lost or stolen between 2018 and 2022. That should be troubling to anybody, because those were legal guns that now are lost, or now illegal guns because they've been stolen. So if Lindsey wants to address legal gun ownership, knowing where these are would be a great idea. Let's see. Provide public and policymakers with more information regarding federally licensed firearm dealers who are violating the law, breaking the law. Presumably the laws that existed before Biden took office, because I don't think many new laws have been created since he took office regarding guns. Use the Department of Defense's acquisition of firearms to further firearm and public safety practices. Gee, why would we want public safety practices to be improved, and why would we want anybody to model those? Encouraging the FTC to issue a public report about how gun manufacturers market firearms to minors and how such manufacturers market firearms to all civilians, including through the use of military imagery. Now, this one's probably going to be controversial to everyone, or to Republicans anyway, but understanding how marketing guns might lead to more violence is important. Maybe she considers that overreach. That's about the closest I can find to something that would be troubling to a Republican. Directing the cabinet to help catch shooters by accelerating federal law enforcement reporting of ballistics data. Again, trying to help catch criminals here. What's the issue? Accelerate and intensify implementation of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, a law that's been passed. Why is that an issue? Improve federal and this just gets me, because this is in this, and given what just happened 2 days ago. Improve federal support for gun violence survivors, victims, and survivors' families, first responders to gun violence, and communities affected by gun violence. The young man who was shot just days into his police job, who bravely went blindly, literally blindly, into a situation to try and stop the shooter, and thankfully his partner did. He was a first responder from Ms. Tichenor's hometown, or not hometown, but her home county. He was a first responder in Oldham County before he became a cop in Louisville. Does she really feel like we shouldn't be supporting gun violence survivors, victims, survivors' families, first responders to gun violence, and communities affected by gun violence? We all, sadly, are directly impacted by gun violence, or know people who are impacted by this same gun violence. I don't think there's very many of us who can escape it. Someone that I went to high school with, and Lindsey and I both went to the same high school, was murdered. His brother was a good friend of mine, and we actually worked together when that incident happened, and it was devastating. And it's an incident of gun violence that and probably everybody in the state knew about, and a lot of classmates of mine were impacted by. This most recent shooting impacted our governor, our mayor, numerous people. I know people that work in that building. I'm sure they're not feeling the best today. So it just blows me away that this is something that I guess Lindsey's upset about. And then finally, advance congressional efforts to prevent the proliferation of firearms undetectable by metal detectors. Again, we hear a lot of talk about school shootings, and it's never about the guns. Guns are not the bad thing. The problem is that our schools have just not done enough to reinforce their walls and their classrooms, and build safe rooms, and put a cop at every corner, and make sure the doors are locked at all hours, because God forbid somebody should have to walk outside. And it's always our school's fault that they haven't done enough. And one of those things that they need to do is put in metal detectors. Well, is Lindsey saying that she doesn't want to address firearms that aren't detectable by metal detectors? Is that right too important to her to keep our kids safe? She has no problem telling us what books our kids should read, which certainly I've never seen a book do any sort of physical damage to a child. I guess if you threw it hard enough, but no, I just don't understand it. And I would guess that Lindsey probably never read this. She just knows that Biden issued an executive order, and Lindsey doesn't like Joe Biden because, in the words of her, when she went to the high school that we both went to register voters, let's go, Brandon. What does that stand for?
We see across the world nations that have restricted firearms from their citizens are essentially slaves to their government.
Yeah, about that, Lindsey. The Council on Foreign Relations did a global comparison of gun policy to several countries, and I think if you were to look down that list of countries, you'll see a lot of people who are indeed slaves to their government and left helpless against their government. Just terrible, terrible countries like Canada, who changed their gun laws in wake of a shooting incident. Australia, same. Israel, interestingly enough, has some pretty strict gun regulations. And I would say that Israel probably has the most direct link to a country that we all like to point to whenever there's something we don't like, and that would be Nazi Germany. Israel still finds it prudent to make sure that their people have some common sense gun laws to regulate gun ownership. United Kingdom, again, not sure, whatever the problems there may be in the United Kingdom, not sure that's exactly a country where people are slaves to their government. Norway, Japan. None of those, to me, seem like they're horrible places to live because you can't buy a gun on every corner and can't own an arsenal. But
They do not have a way to defend themselves from tyrannical overreach, and that was one of the reasons the Second Amendment was put into our Constitution.
okay, this notion is really one that just kind of blows me away because it's not true. I mean, it's not true that the Second Amendment exists basically as our escape hatch anytime we're upset with what the government's doing. We set up a constitution and a framework, and the genius of it, whatever genius there may be, is that it was meant to be a full framework to protect our rights as citizens and to give us ways of addressing problems as we go. That's why we have the court system. That's why we have laws, lawmakers, elections. And all of those are the steps we take to address our problems with the government, not just taking up arms because we're upset. So I don't know where this comes from. If the ultimate amendment is we're unhappy, so let's take some guns and start shooting at people who are making these laws, that's not government. That's just chaos. And it's scary that so many Republicans think that is so important. I don't know where it comes from, but I don't think our founding fathers would look at that statement and go, yeah, that's exactly what we meant. Take up guns if you're mad. But moving on.
I would like to read a quote. Thomas Jefferson very well understood the value of protecting our Second Amendment rights. He said, "The laws that forbid the carrying of arms are laws of such a nature, they disarm only those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage than to prevent homicide. For an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man."
Lots of politicians seem to love their quotes. They just don't like to check and see if it's an actual quote from the person they're quoting. And indeed, this is not a quote from Thomas Jefferson. According to Monticello.org, this statement is not something Jefferson wrote, but rather comes from a passage he included in his legal commonplace book. Passages from Cesare Beccaria's essay on crimes and punishments, originally published in Italian in 1764, And then it goes on to quote how it appears in the book, which is in the original Italian. And it says Jefferson's only notation on this passage was, this is again in Italian, false idee di utilità, which I'm assuming means false idea of utility, but I never took Italian. It goes on to note that the English translation of the passage that appeared in the 1809 edition that Jefferson later owned is different than the quote that Lindsey used. The English translation of this passage originally quoted above, which is the one that Lindsey used, and the one most often seen on other internet sites, is most likely a later translation. It may be taken from a 1963 translation by Henry Pagliucci. So 1963, I think Jefferson was really, really dead by then.
I believe firmly the people of Kentucky want their Second Amendment rights upheld, and I believe this bill should pass.